Namaskar. Welcome to this session of Straight Drive Panorama. I'm Sudhanshu Mani. Viewers, today we'll go into an age-old question. Some would say relevant in today's politics, but I'm not going to say that. And the question is, what is Hinduism? And am I a Hindu? Well, it's a religion which has no system of conversion and it has survived for millennia. And that is what is music to the ears of atheists and agnostics like me. Agnostics like me, yes. It is convenient to be an agnostic because you are non-committal. You kind of exempt yourself from the boundaries of a religion, but still have the liberty to take pride in your philosophy and traditions as and where you find it worthy of pride, or let me say, even arrogance. But all the same, all of us Indians, or at least those calling themselves Hindus, should have a better idea of what Hinduism is all about. I read a book called Am I a Hindu by E.D. Vishwanathan, which was supposed to be a primer for an American born son of a Hindu father. The book provides a non-technical introduction to Hinduism as lived today in reference to religious traditions and practices. At the same time, it would tell you that Hinduism is about the search of true knowledge, search of self, search of answers to all questions. At the end, it also says that the day science will be able to answer all questions, all religions like Hinduism would cease to exist. Okay, the book answers questions by quoting similarities with other religions and without trying to show any other religion in a bad light. That's all fine. But many of us, I would say definitely many of us, are not interested in any comparison. And the book, I would say, leaves us more confused, not wiser. So, believer or non believer, there must be a quest to understand Hinduism better. And today, to understand it better, I'm going to be in dialogue with Mr. Santosh Kumar, IFS retired, former ambassador, and a research analyst, thinker, and Hindi poet. He has a collection of poems entitled Chitakte Quark. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Sir, it is very easy to answer the question whether one was an atheist or a practicing follower as far as the biblical religions are concerned. So I go into this example of Ghalib when questioned by a British officer in the aftermath of the revolt of 1857. He asked Ghalib, "Are you a Muslim?" He said, "Half." Asked to explain, the poet said, "Though I drink wine, I don't eat pork." But I, born in a Hindu family, largely a non-believer, brought up to believe that whatever I do, whatever profanities I commit, I'm a good Hindu as long as I am even notionally engaged in the quest for the truth. So I request you to kindly simplify this question. Am I a Hindu? Sir.
Am I a Hindu? We have to start with the word Hindu.
Sir.
This is a word which is not as ancient as people think it is. It was a word perhaps given by Alexander's armies when they first invaded the Indus Valley kingdoms. And because the Sanskrit name was Sindhu, so which they pronounced as Hindu, so anyone living there was a Hindu. So according to that definition, it's really a geographical term which means anyone living in what is loosely defined as the Indian subcontinent would be a Hindu. In fact, it's very ironical that the original geography which he was referring to, which was the Punjab, because the Indus Valley and the 5 rivers flow through the area where he fought battles. That is now not Hindu in the sense that it is part of Pakistan. In fact, I recall once telling one of my Pakistani colleagues' wife in joke that, you should really call yourself Hindustan because the Sindhu River or the Indus River flows through your territory. And she was, of course, very offended. And she said, oh, now you want our country as well. So anyway, so that is the geographical thing. Now, if you want to look at it in a slightly different philosophical way, you would really, I think the term which was used earlier was Sanatan Dharma, which meant the eternal religion. Now that, if you go back to the Upanishads, that covered several concepts such as the Atma and the Brahma and the goal of uniting the two, rebirth, karma. These were the concepts around which the religion at that time was revolving. But as you go through history, you find that there are many people who didn't believe in one or two or maybe all of these tenets, and they were still not called non-Hindu. So I think conceptually true, it's a very loose term which covers the box of so-called Sanatan Dharma or Hindu, covers a lot of concepts which may or may not be believed in. Then, of course, you have Hinduism. We may still call it that as a shortcut. We have the Hinduism, which is a part of your rituals. People in India who call themselves Hindu go through various rituals from birth to weddings to death. And a lot of us, maybe like you, just go through a few. You may have had a wedding which was by Hindu rituals, but you don't go to temples or you don't do anything else which you would call a Hindu ritual. And at your death, maybe your sons or your family will perhaps cremate you in the Hindu way. So there are just one or two rituals which are normally followed by a lot of people who are educated, but there are other rituals as well. So this is the third level at which you can try and describe Hinduism. The beauty of it, as you said, is that there is no institutional mechanism which can define you. There's no institution which can say, no, you are not a Hindu or you are a Hindu. So I think the answer to your question is that, you are a Hindu by default, as long as you feel you are Hindu. And I don't think, for most people, it has anything to do with the search for truth. It's just a matter of identification. If you identify yourself as a Hindu, then you are a Hindu, and you continue to be one until such time as you loudly proclaim that you're not.
Well, I would, from your answer, also understand then that the term practicing Hindu is irrelevant because it does not apply. Well, something a bit more specific, sir. So we have a perception of an ancient Hindu past, and the contemporary Indian civilization contains many strands of continuity from thousands of years. So how do you see this continuity, and how does this conform to the popular perception of our imagined past?
It is true that Hinduism can trace its ancestry or its origins to a very, very ancient time, thousands of years ago. Of course, perhaps we don't know enough about the first manifestations of civilization in India, which is the Indus Valley civilization. We don't really know what sort of religion they practiced, apart from a few seals and what we can deduce from the plans of their cities. But if you then come to the times of the Vedas, from there you can trace a certain amount of similarity with how we understand or people understand Hinduism today. But the reverse side of that coin is also that much has changed. And um, if I can take you through it in a sort of very short uh, historical way, the basic religion which the Vedic uh, people practiced. And mind you, there are differences because the different parts of the Veda were written by different rishis. But in any case, basically what they practiced was uh, to consider the forces of nature, which they could not explain, as gods or as devas. And they had ritual yagyas to please these gods and to ask them for favors in this life. And I stress the word this life because they asked for prosperity, they asked for sons, and so on and so forth, success. And the yagyas were supposed to please the gods, and the gods would then give them those things. So this was the basic simple religion which the early Vedas contained. And I mind you in those, there is no mention of Vishnu or Shiva or anything of these sort of principal deities that we are very familiar with today. Next, we come to the period of the Upanishads and the Aranyaks, where, as I had mentioned earlier, concepts of Atma and Brahma and the the goal of life being to realize the unity of the two. And of course, a very revolutionary thing that the Atma is something which pervades not only you, but all living creatures. I mean, that was a revolutionary concept which the Vedas put forward. So, sorry, the Upanishads put forward. And these ideas have since then permeated in one form or the other uh, the Sanatan Dharma or Hinduism as it comes down to us today. But I must hasten to add that this was then morphed into something else a few centuries later when we come to the Puranas, which deal more with mythical stories, and you have an introduction of different gods and devas and devis and so on and so forth, which were also present in some form in the Upanishads, but they were not as important as the philosophical concepts. Then, of course, you have an interlude of Buddhism coming down the centuries, where Buddha was not really, he was silent on the existence of any god, and he really talked of a way of life that should be followed while you are here, and that way of life would get you nirvana or release from the cycle of rebirth. After that, you had Shankaracharya, who preached the Advaita philosophy, and from that then proceeded to come out various rituals, an introduction of new rituals, and an introduction of the bhakti cults, where you had a personal god whom you prayed to, and there was a proliferation of gods. So if you look at this entire historical panorama, you see that the religion practiced in the Vedas, which we all today hark back to, was quite different from what Hinduism is understood or practiced as today. the yajna in those times, which was a principal ritual and which involved sacrifices of animals. And there are also some texts where human sacrifices are also mentioned, and all sorts of animals were sacrificed. That has given way to a symbolic yajna, where you have a havan when you have a ritual, and the pandits give various oblations to the fire. But it's a very different form of a yajna from the actual yajna of the Vedas. Then you have, as a big component of the way Hinduism is understood today, the concept of vegetarianism. Now, during the time of the Vedas and right up to the times of Ashoka, there was no vegetarianism. People enjoyed all sorts of animals to eat. And this was also part of the ritual of the Vedic yajna. I think the vegetarianism came as a response or a response to Buddhism, where in Buddhism the one of the principal tenets was, non-violence and compassion towards all human beings. And this was taken over by the Brahminical response to Buddhism, and you had vegetarianism coming out of it. Similarly, even if you take things like cremation, which is the common practice of disposing of dead under Hinduism. I mean, there are some evidences which suggest that in the old times, perhaps even pre-Vedic times, when the people who later started following the Vedas, when they were in the areas of Central Asia and in Northwest India, there was the burial. Burial was the way to dispose of at least some of the dead. So, and of course, we come to the caste system, where we are familiar with how it manifests itself today and how it was maybe a century ago or 50 years ago. But if you really go back into history of the Vedic times, it was something which was much looser. People could, according to their abilities, go from one caste to another. What was ancient upward mobility, you might say. And the system then developed into something more rigid, and you have the Manusmriti, which really laid down, or rather, which codified the whole caste concept. So what I'm saying basically is that two things. Firstly, that Hinduism, as is generally understood today, has both continuities with the ancient religion that was practiced in this part of the world, but it also has dissimilarities, which means that it is a religion which has constantly changed itself according to circumstances and time.
So, you let us know certain not so well-known facts here, and you talked about Buddhism and its silence about God and generally being about the way of life. So, appearance of Buddhism and its disappearance from the mother country is a question which is baffling, and it plays in the mind of people like me, and I'm sure many others, to say the least. So I know there may not be a simplistic explanation, but it certainly is a subject we should explore. While it could be a matter of pride that such a great pan-Asia religion was born here, apart from other religions, it should be somewhat disquieting that such a progressive thought in those days totally retreated from our country. So how do you see this?
I think we have to start with the fact that religion, especially in the old times, was really partly at least propagated by royal patronage. If you look at Buddhism, the biggest push to Buddhism was made by Emperor Ashoka. And therefore, the patronage which the state or the ruler gave to that religion explained why it suddenly became very prevalent. And indeed, as you said, he also sent missions to other parts of the world, to Sri Lanka, to many of the Southeast Asian and East Asian countries, and so it spread all over the world, and of course through the Silk Route to Central Asia. So similarly, if after the breakup of the Maurya Empire, there were different smaller kingdoms which formed, and the centralized patronage which was given by Ashoka really broke up, and Hindu rulers who came into power then propagated their own brand of religion or sect, the sect which they belonged to, and so therefore you had rulers who were Shaivite or who were Vaishnavite, and even they fought wars with each other, and they fought wars with Buddhist kingdoms. So it was a part of the religion was a part of the political struggle and struggle for ascendancy between different rulers. Having said that, we can't ignore the conceptual side, where the principal player was Shankaracharya, who really set out on a mission to answer the teachings of Buddhism by a revival of Sanatana Dharma. And of course, he propagated the Advaita philosophy and combated those Buddhist concepts on a conceptual basis. So his movement also explains to a large extent why Buddhism went out of fashion in India. The third aspect which I might want to refer to is that, for the common man, the concept of devtas, the concepts of devtas who are local to their own dwelling place where they dwell, and the concept of bhakti. These are things which are more easily understandable, especially if you're not very educated. And in those times, you must remember that a large part of the population of the country didn't know even how to read or write. And so they were their idea of religion derived from their local practices and rituals and their bhakti emotions, rather than from any analytical reading of scriptures and so on. So I think there was this emotional appeal which came to the fore, and which also helped in re-establishing what we now call Hinduism or Sanatana Dharma.
Sir.
One more thing which I might say is that, in India, there's always been a permeability between different religions which have originated here. So there was not that sharp distinction between Buddhism and Hinduism. And in fact, even when you come to more modern times, Hinduism has imported Buddha into, he's become the Dashavatar, the 10th avatar, or the 9th avatar, or whatever it is. So there was not that sharp contrast between one religion and another as between the religions which originated in India. And so it was easier for the resurgent Sanatan Dharma to also co-opt some of the Buddhist ideas and really, in a sense, digest Buddhism.
Yes, sir. So I'll come to the last inevitable question, sir. So in today's world, particularly in India, where lack of understanding of our own Hinduism, I dare say, is profound. So what Hindu validity can be drawn from Hinduism for our current society and politics? Your view on that, sir?
Let me start by saying that Hinduism is one of the major unifying factors in this country. We have a country where there's a plethora of languages, of ethnic groups, of regions. And one thing which runs through all these is their idea of being Hindu. And this is very dramatically brought out if you go, let's say, as I did, to the Kumbh Mela in Prayagraj, where you have a vast multitude of people from all over the country who are coming there out of their devotion and belief in the religion. And more recently, I went to some of the temples in Karnataka, and the same thing. There are common people, men and women from all over that region who were coming barefoot to the temples. So, as far as the common man in India is concerned, it is a factor which unites him with other parts of the country. And to that extent, I think it is an underlying factor in Indian nationalism. Second thing is, and this was brought home to me by a foreigner who has sort of turned almost Hindu, and he said that the concept of having many gods, the fact of having many gods, you may have an Ishta Devta, but you also respect and maybe worship other Hindu deities. Wherever you go, you may do a namaskar or bow and then move away. So this concept of being aware of many devtas or gods makes you more tolerant. And this is an aspect of society which we need to develop very sorely, or rather regenerate very sorely in our country, with the concept of tolerance, where if you really are a true Hindu, or consider yourself to be a true Hindu, then this tolerance becomes a very important aspect of your attitudes. But more importantly, I think it is a factor which is both for the positive and the negative in our social structures. If I may go a little bit into the history of it, starting from the late 19th century, you had various reform movements in India, which aimed to reform in Hindu society. You start with Brahmo Samaj, which was inspired by Western social ethics, and it sort of came out against the caste system, against the treatment that was then being meted out to widows or Harijans for their upliftment in society. And this was followed by other reformers like Phule, like Ambedkar, like Vinoba Bhave, who followed some aspects of what he was aiming at. And I would also mention, and this might be a bit controversial, but I must also mention that, Savarkar wrote a long essay on demolishing the caste system, where he proposed seven measures to break down the caste system. So this was what was happening pre-independence. After independence, there has been the relevance of Hinduism to the present-day society has been that the old Hindu teachings on social matters have sought to be reformed, and you have a slew of laws which tried to do this. You have the Hindu Code Bill, which you have the Hindu Women's Succession Act, you have the Untouchability Act, and many other laws. So many aspects of reforming Hinduism have been covered insofar as legislation is concerned, insofar as enacting laws is concerned. These objectives have also been aided by impersonal forces like modernization and urbanization. In today's big cities, many of the issues which were there in earlier society have become gradually diluted or irrelevant. But there are, of course, we must admit, other reforms where we are still silent, or we ignore, or we have not made so much progress. And perhaps this is due to the fact that laws by themselves are not enough. Laws are not enough. They have to be implemented vigorously. People have to be prepared for them through education, through the media, and so forth. So you have to have a proactive policy apart from enacting laws. And perhaps that is an area where we are lacking, and why progress, while there has been progress, it has not been as fast as we would desire it to be. So I think that is the way in which religion and present-day society interact. I mean, some of them, it's a two-way traffic, and we have to recognize that there are some positive and some negative elements in that.
Thank you very much, sir, for joining us today and letting us know your perspective on this unending question of our ethos. And I'm sure our viewers are certainly a little wiser today. Viewers, I hope you liked the program. We will end the program today at this point, but join you again next Thursday with a burning national issue in Straight Drive. Thank you very much. Namaskar.
Thank you.